hello, all you folks out there at Investigators News 2. We're going to have to come up with our own name here. Anyway, is war imminent? Is nuclear war imminent? If you have an opinion, throw it in the chat and we'll discuss it here in a bit. So, speaking of war, are we ready?
Yeah, you're on, dude.
So, speaking of war, is Representative Matt Gaetz said he will co-sponsor a bill with a Democrat, Sarah Jacobs, to stop the transfer of bombs to Ukraine, transfer of cluster bombs to Ukraine, and that it's a bipartisan part that they're going to put in on a bill. So, are we in favor of sending cluster bombs to Ukraine?
William, 120 countries think it's basically inhuman to do this.
So 120 countries have signed that it's illegal as part of the Geneva Convention.
Bingo.
But the United States nor Russia is a signatory to the Geneva Convention. So Matt Gaetz is correct when he says that cluster bombs will not stop war in Ukraine. Only talks with the United States or Ukraine or U.S. NATO involvement can stop the war. At least that's my opinion. U.S. NATO involvement can stop the war in Ukraine.
William, did you hear that?
If there are no talks.
Now, William, did you hear that the reason we're sending cluster bombs is because our ammunition is low?
Yeah, so here's the thing with that. The Biden administration just decided that it's time to expand production and go on a war production footing, not an economic war footing, just a production footing. And like we talked about quite a while ago, that we needed to be on a complete war footing to be able to be doing all of this. And apparently the Biden administration's starting to lean that way. But it's like with all wars, they control the leaders, not the other way around. So it's inevitable, if you ask me. But hey, I'm just one of those grunts out there that retired. So okay, let's talk about what cluster bombs are and their legacy. So let's start with the legacy. Where have we used cluster bombs? Well, we used them in Vietnam. We used them in Afghanistan. We used them in Iraq. They were used in Kuwait. And a type was used in Kosovo. Now, there's another type of cluster bomb that's not explosive, but what it does is it has bomblets that showers out carbon fibers, and they land on substations and power grids and wipe out the electricity grid. So that's another type of a cluster type bomb. And Russia has already used them in Ukraine. If you remember back a while ago in the Ukraine reporting that children had picked up bomblets that had blown off their hands, and some children, their feet couldn't use them. Now, if we use cluster bombs, if we give these to the Ukrainians, they can only be delivered by air power. And Ukraine has limited ability to do ground targeting with air power. So are cluster bombs actually going to help? I don't know. But I don't think it's going to make a difference in the war. What it does is buys another space of time. Every time you escalate in a war, you're escalating not to necessarily win war. If that's what you're escalating, it's just to buy a little more time to wear down your enemy, to go through this killing process, create this meat grinder, where nobody actually wins, but everybody keeps fighting until they're too tired to fight anymore. And that's what we're going through right now in Ukraine. And nobody wants to say that's what's going on, but that's what's going on. Let's see. Has anybody else joined us in the chat room yet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's Susan and Karen. Oh, yeah. So we're not alone. That's good. Now, to our next item. Julian Assange has decided to sue the Central Intelligence Agency. So that's going to be interesting because they've had him tied up in a cell in the UK now for how many years, and have not extradited him. No president has been willing to extradite him yet. So how long can you keep somebody detained? I think he may have a chance here by filing a lawsuit. We have a new thing that's being reported by Redacted. So, a man, is now breastfeeding an adopted child with, what do we call that, Ellie? It's a terrible, what do we come up with? The term, man milk? Man, yeah. Let's move on. What do you even say to stuff like this? Anyway, Redacted's, reporting this, and it's, I guess, a news item. It's the first time, right? They've got him amped up on some sort of modifications to his system so that, this isn't what normally happens.
You know what gets me though, William, is we are low on ammunition. And we're not hearing.
Well, we can replace ammunition.
Okay,
really
but
quickly.
We're not talking about it. But now Zelensky is saying we need ammunition. So instead of ammunition, we're sending cluster bombs. And now we're looking at NATO, a whole NATO conference that's happening in, I can't think of the name of the country, Lithuania. I could be wrong there.
Yeah, I've got that. We've talked about that in just a minute. So we can manufacture things as quickly as we choose. Now, we willing to do it without complete testing? So, like, Russia sends cluster bombs, and 34% or so of the cluster munitions are duds. They don't go off, so they're laying around on the ground that can be caused to explode by human means, but not just by the airdrop itself. So, and the United States, on the other hand, our cluster munitions, all but 2% detonate on delivery. So, is ours more or less humane? And these are simple munitions. Artillery shells are simple munitions. These are not complex things to make. They can be basically stamped out and machined quickly. You've seen all these CNC machines that are available in all these manufacturing plants. All these CNC machines can be used to make weapons, not just parts for this, that, and the other. And it's just a matter of choosing whether or not we're going to have the munitions available or not, and at what level we're willing to manufacture them. Now, this isn't really a problem for the United States. We can be a manufacturing powerhouse if we decide to. It's really a political decision. So are we running low on munitions? Yeah, we could be running low on munitions. Do we have to be running low on munitions? No. So if we're not prepared for the next contingency, for the next operation, for the next war, who takes responsibility for that? It's the administration. Now, it's just like at the border. Are we going to control the border? We're not going to control the border. Are we going to make munitions? We're not going to make munitions. Are we going to hold the economy down? I mean, you've got the Club for Growth, right? That should be, the Club for No Growth? And as long as they're winning the argument, we're going to be low on weapons. Well, we should just go ahead and expand the economy and go ahead and make the weapons we need to protect ourselves. If we don't, the president is involved with malfeasance. Congress is involved with malfeasance. Now, has Congress provided enough military financial wherewithal to the military? We give our military probably the second greatest wherewithal to provide arms for the American military of any government in the world. So, yeah, we have the money available. Are we going to manufacture them? It's just a matter of will we or won't we. We can make demands on the military industrial complex. Think about it. How many military manufacturers are there in the United States? You've got General Dynamics, you've got Boeing, you've got Martin Marietta, you've got Lockheed Martin, you have Raytheon, you've got Ford, General Motors, General Electric, and 1,000 other manufacturers out there. Now, can we have the weapons we need? Absolutely. Do we have the will to have the weapons we need? That's a different question, Ellie. So,
well, now we're looking at now. I have to give Governor Abbott credit because he has been able to get many states to send National Guard to the borders, and now they're doing buoys.
So Why send them? Why send them if you can't turn the people around and you can't send the people back? Are you sending them for security of the safety and security of the border patrol? I'm confused about all this. What are the rules of engagement if one of our armed forces come across somebody that's illegally entering the country? Do they only have the right to turn them around and send them back across the river, or stop them from crossing just a barbed wire? I mean, what does it mean? And here's something else. What if the migrant refuses to obey? Then what do they do? I think this is all very unclear. Do they have the right to have them? They have the power to arrest them and detain them, or do they have just the right to detain them until border security can take possession of them? I don't understand it, and it seems weak. The only thing it does is puts more eyes and ears on the border, I think.
William, are they confusing us due to they are hiding things, or are they confusing us to confuse the border?
I think it's just a political statement. Remember when Mayorkas came to Congress and said that he's in control of the border? That was just a political statement. We send military to the border. Does anything change?
No.
Has the flow reduced?
No.
How many are turned back? It's just a political statement. And we get these political statements all the time. It's like the DOJ issuing arrest warrants for businessmen in China. Yeah, so you don't have the ability to arrest or extradite them. What does that mean? It's just words. There's no power to enforce it. So, okay, we'll call it rhetoric. Just words, meaningless words. So why is NATO and the United States so phobic of Russia, Russia-phobic? Why are the neocons so Russia-phobic? Why are the American people so Russian-phobic? Now, you remember the Soviet Union. That was a good reason to be phobic. They were communist, and they were threatening to destroy America and dominate the world. Well, that's a good reason to be phobic, but they're not that anymore. They're a regional power. They're not a world power, except with the exception of being able to launch nuclear weapons. But does the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, does that make them a world power like, say, United States? No. Is Russia able to project itself vitally across Europe right now? Doesn't look like it. I don't think the Russian people would tolerate that. So why are we so Russia-phobic? And this is the reason that I've come across is Europe is deeply rooted in a hate for Russia. Russia is straddling all the landlocked nations of Eurasia. Now, if you take what's south of Russia and has no access to the Pacific or the Mediterranean or the Indian Ocean, those are the landlocked nations. Now, in the 1600s, the scholars believe that whoever held the power over those centralized Eurasian nations, that they had the greatest military or power or control of anybody on the planet. Because remember, Europe was geocentric in their thinking. They just come out of the Dark Ages where all the constellations rotated around the Earth, and Galileo had came up with this crazy thing that no, we actually orbit the sun. And that was a heresy, and he was, misinformation and deplatformed, we call that today. But in the education of the elites of Europe, not public education, but the elite private educations, this logic is still currently believed, and it's been taught for since the 1600s. This is how and where control is held. Now remember, we've had a bunch of global wars. Remember when the French attacked Russia with Napoleon? That was considered a world war back then. The English tried to attack through the Black Sea. The Germans came across Poland. They've all attacked Russia. Why do they attack Russia if Russia's not being expansionist at the time? It's because they believe that Russia has a special power because it straddles Eurasia. And whoever has that power, in fact, will have the power to control the world. Now, this is deeply held by the aristocracy, the elites, the kings, sons and daughters of kings and queens of the past. And it's still held by the neocons that are still rooted in Europe, even though they're here in the United States, sworn allegiance to the United States, born in the United States. Their families are still rooted in the logic and in the European ideals of power of Eurasia, and they're willing to go to fight against Russia for that reason. And that's really the only real reason that's out there, because Russia is simply not a global power in the capacity of the United States. They can hurt the United States, but they can't destroy the United States. The United States could destroy Russia, but Russia can't destroy the United States without destroying the world. The United States could destroy Russia without destroying the world. So it's a minor power compared to the United States. So that's that. And you're not going to get the neocons to believe otherwise. Now, while we're here, and we've also been hearing rumblings, will Biden be impeached? That's a good question. Will he be impeached? But we know currently that he's in full damage control, right, with this Hunter Biden and the revelations that are coming out. So where is he? He's meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, the King of England. Then he's going to go on to the NATO summit. And he's got Yellen over in China. And she's bowing to Mr. Xi Jinping. So we know that the Biden administration is busy trying to change the story that's in the Western media right now. And will NATO at the summit, are they going to balk at these cluster munitions? And or is this just a way that, are they going to meet to decide how NATO could enter the war with Russia in anonymity? Meaning, can NATO have plausible deniability yet enter into war directly with Russia on the side of Ukraine? I think that's what's about to be discussed, because Ukraine is losing the capacity to be able to engage in meaningful warfare with Russia. Now, they can kind of hold their territory. They can punish Russia for moving forward, but they can't expel Russia out of the territories. That's beyond their capacity now. If you hear in the media, like, they've been discussing that a couple of towns they've taken control over. So Ukrainian troops have moved into a couple of small towns, hamlets, if you will. And Ukrainians claiming they've taken control of it, but they don't have security over the very edge of those towns, meaning that Russia can still shell the town. Russia can still punish anybody that moves in the town. So do they really have control of the town? When the United States went into Europe and into Germany, we controlled the cities, meaning that we produced safety for all the inhabitants of that city. We stopped all the fighting in those cities and the ability to attack those cities. That's what we meant by control of these cities. But in the media, they talk about controlling these towns like they actually have control of them in the way that we had control of the city, that we had conquered that area during World War II, and it's simply not the same. They're using the same words, but with different meanings. So keep that in mind when you're listening to the Western media, because, they tend to conflate and take things out of context and do everything they can to dissuade us one way or the other. Now, here's the big question. Is nuclear war imminent? What do y'all think? Now, Karen thinks Ukraine will lose, and there's good evidence out there that they may. So let's see what we're going to talk about with nuclear war, because that's back in the news again. The nuclear war and, if you will, space boogeyman. All right, we'll just forget the space boogeyman for today. So we know Russia.
William, with the cluster bombs, I think Putin isn't going to tolerate this.
Well, he has a number of ways of punishing over those cluster bombs. He can still escalate by going to white phosphorus. He can still escalate by going to bariatric bombs, serious weapons. He hasn't been dropping 2,000 pounders 200, 500 pounders. They haven't started using the Russian Air Force to haul heavy bomb loads like we do with the B-52s. They're still using attack aircraft. They haven't moved to strategic heavy aircraft, high altitude raids. There's a number of ways they can still punish Ukraine and their allies short of going to nuclear weapons. So we know that when countries get destabilized, they become desperate, right, Ellie?
Yes.
So let's look at Russia. Now, Russia just forced out the head military officer in the MOD. And Prigozhin, apparently 2 days after he went to Belarus, had face-to-face meetings with Putin. So we know that Putin did a massive misdirection, information warfare on the Western press, and they took that hook, line, and sinker. So is Russia really destabilized? Russia still has the majority support of their population. So no, Russia currently is not destabilized. It's stressed, but it's not destabilized. Now, is the state of Ukraine destabilized?
Yes.
Well, if they're asking for cluster munitions and they're going to get cluster munitions,
William,
they may
the thing with
be destabilized.
now they have never mentioned getting the tanks. They've never mentioned getting anything that we've sent. So are we sending cluster bombs that will never get there?
No, they've got tanks. They have tanks now they're using. And they have APCs, and they've lost a number of them already. Just like I said that they would lose them pretty quickly because they don't have any air support. They're just using it like they're using tanks as a bludgeoning weapon. They're not using tanks as a defeating weapon. They're not using the right strategy to use the tanks effectively. They're throwing hardware and blood away. Okay? So
they never mentioned,
way,
William, they've never mentioned receiving the aircraft either.
well, they haven't received anything but Soviet-era aircraft. Okay? The F-16s are going to be in the future. They're just getting people through the training programs right now. And just because you can fly an airplane doesn't mean you can effectively use an airplane.
Bingo.
Just because you can get an aircraft on the ground doesn't mean you can handle the aircraft. Just because you can start the aircraft doesn't mean the aircraft can't overwhelm you and make you gray out, pass out, and die in that aircraft. The F-16 is a special type of aircraft. Okay, it's an inherently unstable aircraft. What does that mean? That means without the speed of computer processing, any action you would take on the controls of the aircraft would happen so quickly you couldn't counteract them quick enough, and you would just roll the plane in and kill yourself. It's so responsive. By making it that responsive, you make it super efficient. So what they do is they use computers to gain control of the aircraft so they can have a hyper-efficient weapon. But what that does mean is it can burn 9Gs indefinitely.
William,
There's
you
no
know,
man that can take my Jeep continuously.
the thing is when we look at, and not to change the subject, we look at the drones that they were obstructing the F-16s in Syria. You know they're doing the same in the Red Sea and
So
over.
drones can't stop an aircraft. All right. There are no drones out there that can defeat an F-16 yet.
Right.
Okay. So drones aren't a problem. Surface to air missiles are a problem. Other aircraft are a problem. But there's no drone that could take on a fighter aircraft yet.
Thank you.
Not it. They may be able to trap an aircraft, meaning that if an aircraft came through their zone and they had a weapon, okay, they could take a shot and may hit an aircraft, but they can't dogfight with an aircraft. They can't pursue an aircraft. They can only, I can't think of the word right now.
But now, what we're seeing though is if they're complaining about Syria, you know they're complaining about what they're doing to Ukraine.
Well, Syria is complaining about drones, and Syria complains about the U.S. military on their soil. I don't know what they're saying really with respect to Ukraine, and I'm not sure it matters. Syria is more important. What Syria is doing with Israel, I think, matters, or with the Iranians, where they're surrogates for Iranians. That's an important dynamic, but what Syria thinks about what's going on in Ukraine, I think, is something to talk about in the news. That's about it. So then let's look at the United States. Is the United States destabilized? So we're willing to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. So we have a concern, right? We're discussing whether or not to entertain the idea of allowing Ukraine to enter NATO, but at least two of the three branches of government are functioning just fine. The Congress, the Supreme Court, Homeland Security, as much as they choose. So I don't think we're destabilized. I think we might be under stress. Now let's look at Europe. Is Europe destabilized right now? So Europe's destabilized, I would say, as European partners. You've got France in turmoil. You've had Germany in turmoil. You've had the Czech Republic in turmoil. So Europe is at sort of a point they're destabilized.
Do you think that's why they're doing the NATO conference right now?
So let's talk about that in just a minute. I'm discussing right now whether nuclear war is imminent. So let's say, as far as destabilization goes, the United States is maybe 1/3 destabilized, and Russia's maybe 1/3 destabilized, and Ukraine's maybe, let's say, 2/3 destabilized. And I would say Europe is about between 1/5 and 2/5 destabilized. So if you look at that, and then you look at what would happen if a nuclear war started, the unthinkable, right? So if you add that to maybe 70% unlikelihood of a destabilizing effect causing global war, and then you add the deterrence of nuclear weapons, the killing effect, I would say that the likelihood of nuclear war is like pretty much negligible. We're not there yet. Now, as far as the NATO summit, that's about, there's a lot of people in the European Union and NATO that have signed the agreement against certain weapons of mass, they consider of mass destruction, like chemical agents, biological agents, cluster munitions, indiscriminate weapons, untargetable weapons, broad area weapons, they consider immoral. So there's going to be those discussions. You may find somebody that wants to bail out of NATO over it, may want to, because Ukraine's willing to use them, not want them voted into NATO. I think all those kinds of discussions are going to go on. But I think mostly what's going to go on is how do we get Russia to at least lose in Ukraine? That's going to be the discussion. How do we do that? And I think they're quickly coming to the realization that the only way to do that is Ukraine has to have an effective Air Force. And Ukraine's not going to have an effective Air Force, regardless of how many airplanes we send them, because they don't understand how to use our electronic intelligence aircraft. They don't understand how to use our jammers. They have no concept of weasels, hunter-killer task force. They don't have aircraft that can go and do.
They really don't have an established military.
Right. They have a quasi-functional military, but they don't have the capacity in air. They can make small tactical strikes, don't get me wrong, but they can't dominate their airspace. They don't maintain control over the airspace over those territories at all. They're taking drone strikes and missile strikes that they're not bringing down. All of Ukraine is under threat. So the only way for the Ukrainians to expel Russia is have a massive infusion of armor, personnel, and have a fully functioning Air Force, complete with, domination of the airspace. And that only comes through the United States and NATO. That's where we're getting to quickly. And if Ukraine becomes too weak manpower-wise and as far as their will, it won't matter what weapons they have available. But they're wasting the weapons that they do have because they don't have an effective military. would just wreck Ukraine. When Putin says he's running a limited operation, he's serious about it. And it's true, because he hasn't deployed the complete weight of his Air Force. And air power takes what is a military force and puts them on steroids. Instead of taking 1-to-1 losses or 2-to-1 losses or 1-to-2 losses, now all of a sudden it's 1-to-30 losses.
You know, William, when I look at Ukraine, and we look at where United States was number one, China was two, Russia was three, and when we look at Ukraine in the picture, it is very weak compared to a superpower.
Ukraine doesn't exist next to a superpower.
And I don't think the media and I know we put this forward, but with the Truth and News, but when you look at a non-existent military country to a superpower, there's no winning.
So Iraq with Saddam could not withstand the might and power of Russia.
Right.
Right now, Iran could not withstand the weight and power of Russia. As strong as it is, it could not withstand that. There's very few countries in the world that can withstand the weight and power of Russia if it chose to express itself.
If we look at like Libya, and if they went to war with Russia would eliminate them. I think.
Well, look, they sent Wagner into Libya and basically took control over vast portions of Libya with just a mercenary group. Libya doesn't have a military.
Right, and Ukraine didn't have a military group
apart
until the Azov battalion, and all that was a Nazi group, very small. We have to look at what happened in 2016 when it was the Azov battalion, and it was a mercenary group against civilians. And now, it's
battalion
this
is an effective fighting force, a small tactical fighting force.
Right, and it's supplied by the United States military, and so now we are looking at a very small military group against a superpower.
But they're not fighters that can contend with a superpower.
Bingo.
It wouldn't matter what they did. They simply don't have the power. They can punish whoever comes into their sphere, but without support from outside, they simply don't exist. They're an irritation.
Right.
They're like a pimple on a water buffalo's hiney.
And this is something we could talk on Wednesday on, because it's strategic. Because everybody keeps saying Ukraine could win Russia. How could they win against a superpower when they're less than even Iraq?
The only reason Ukraine exists right now is because
NATO.
Putin chose not to go to war. He chose to run a police action. He's running a police action just like we did in Vietnam, just like he does in Syria, just like we did in Syria. It's a police action. If he was to bring his full weight upon that, he would be a contender. We would stop him someplace in Europe. But he's chosen not to. So it is what it is. Now, Scott Ritter says that now that Russia's done with negotiations with the West, and also his own battle staff dragging their feet. So Putin has a problem with the battle staff in Ukraine in his special operation dragging their feet. Now he's tired of that, but he's not saying let's deploy the might of the full Russian military. He's not saying let's commit 100%. He's just rearranging some battle staff that aren't being effective, aren't using their training properly. So, they've accepted the resignation of the head of the MOD, so to speak, and it's kind of, in Russia, bad news, but it's of no real consequence to anybody but a single individual or two. So that's what's going on there. So we don't have to worry about nuclear war yet. Now,
I don't think nuclear war will happen until we are looking at the head-on-head with China over Taiwan.
If we go head-to-head with Russia and Russia feels threatened, existentially threatened by the United States. Now, I'm not talking about coming up to its border. It is threatened that we will come into Moscow and take over the capital. They'll launch, and we'll be in a situation that's untenable. Russia is not going away.
No.
And as long as Putin has control of his nuclear stockpile, Russia is not going away.
I don't even think it depends. I don't think, William.
And China go away simultaneously.
William, the whole thing is, even if Putin wasn't there and there was someone else in power, I think we'd still be looking at the same thing we are now.
Nothing changes. In fact, if Putin wasn't there, we could be looking at a lot worse situation.
Bingo. Yeah.
If we have somebody that's not completely politically savvy or understands geopolitical situations in total, we could have a very destabilized individual with power over a nuclear stockpile.
Yeah.
We could have a Brezhnev.
Putin was advised by Gorbachev.
Well,
boy, I'm picking your brain on this. I know we didn't discuss this, but this is stuff me and you talk about on the phone a lot.
Gorbachev had a relationship with Yeltsin. They didn't have really a relationship with Putin until Putin came back from Eastern Europe and started solving problems in and around Moscow as the Soviet Union started collapsing. And when they found he was a person that was able to get things done, Yeltsin leaned on him more and more.
Right.
And at that point, they started turning things over to Putin. But Yeltsin saved the life of Gorbachev, not Putin.
Right.
Yeltsin was their leader, an alcoholic leader there for a little while. He was a good bridge, and he had others around. Remember, we had the Soviet State Department. I forget the name of the guy who went down and became the leader of Georgia. I forget his name just now, but he was also a stabilizing factor in the Russian government. There were numbers of individuals that kept Russia together, and the United States had no desire to take over Russia. It would have been a disaster area. It's weapons, we had an arsenal without countries. We were trying to grab up nuclear weapons all over the place and either put them out of service or turn them over to Russia to control, because that was at least better than having free radicals with nuclear weapons all over the planet. So Russia served a purpose when the Soviet Union fell. And so a lot of weapons were given to the satellite states from Russia. Okay, you can keep these airplanes, tanks, this, that, and the other, but please turn over the nuclear weapons because we want to maintain control of those in a coherent manner. And of course, they didn't want to, and so the United States would intervene. We would use monetary help to give them. We would use diplomatic. If we had to, we would use special forces to go and gain access to and take control of those weapons. We couldn't tolerate those being all over, ending up, say, in the Middle East. Could you imagine what it would be like during the time of Iraq and Iran, and all of a sudden you introduce nuclear weapons into the mix, and Syria and Libya and Egypt and Yemen, and let's not even forget about Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all the stands. What happens if they have weapons, strategic weapons? So Russia really hasn't been an existential threat to the United States, except in the situation where they feel they're about to lose their country, not their satellites, but their own country. Then they would launch. But here's the thing about nuclear weapons. When one strategic goes up, all right, the second one that goes up, everybody goes. China will be afraid Russia will launch on them. United States will be afraid if they don't take out the Chinese weapons at the same time, that we'll get a retaliatory strike. So everybody who has them will throw them simultaneously. I don't think the world really understands it. They think it's, and there's idiots that think out there that, well, we can toss one or we can toss two, and no. When the heavies go up, they all go up, and the light ones turn into heavies very quick. So it's just not a game that can be played. Okay, now, where are we next? Oh, it turns out that Billy Gates' potted plant grown beef may be in our meat supply. Who knew? Is he doping us with in our hamburgers? Should we be concerned, Ellie? They may do that to make the argument that, hey, it's okay. We can go ahead. It's no big deal. You've been eating it for so long now. All right, moving on. So the next item. So Biden's bumbling, being led around in public by the Prime Minister of the UK as well as King Charlie, Magellan is over in China with our, good friends Xi Jinping. So yeah, we don't look so strong around the world, and so what happens when administrations look weak? Remember what Johnson did when he felt he didn't look so strong. He started this little police action without Congress in this little country called Vietnam, sent advisors, and that's what I think is going to happen in this new NATO summit. That's what they're going to be talking about. Here's some new news. So we have F-15s and F-35s in the United States landing in Japan in numbers. And it's unclear if it's for just training or deterrence or just cooperation and technical interoperability. I haven't heard which it is exactly, but numbers of 15s and 35s are landing in Japan. So that's a bullet point. So according to Steve Bannon at War Room, Giuliani has been targeted by the bar and the feds over presenting to the Republican investigators in one of the states 65,000 ballots that weren't able to be seen by Republicans during the last, what they call it. And also, another bullet point, Miss Kari Lake in Arizona is under, I guess we could call it a concerted media attack for her last run. She's saying she might be over the target because the media flack is pretty strong. So she feels like she's getting to the root of problems there. Now here's something I'm very interested in. Now discussions going on in the media or in parts of the social media at least about the Catholic bishops causing a worsening of the situation at the southern border crisis. And I'm not sure whether they are or not, right? But I don't think we should just focus on the Catholic Church and their involvement. We have other groups that could be profiting. Who sends out missionaries around the world? And when they do their proselytizing, where do people want to go? If you have a church in the United States proselytizing, so are Mormons or the third way between Islam and Christianity, the Baha'is, are they profiting from this? Is public-private partnerships in the government, are they profiting? Is United Nations profiting? Or is it economic groups like corporations and investment funds? Are they profiting from this? So I don't think we should just be focusing on the Catholic faith and some bishops taking care of the flock outside the United States. Now, is what they're saying helping people to change their mind about coming to the United States? Maybe. But that happens all over the place. That happens in India with our tech sector. That happens in Africa with our oil sector, right? So as far as saying that this is a Catholic problem, I think that's bashing a church. I think whoever is selling our sovereignty and like I said, there may be many groups involved one way or another, but that'll be sorted out over time. That'll show up in history. And if that's pushed too far, we'll end up in a war, right? We'll end up in the great thing they call war, the blood sport, the battlefield. Anyway, whoever seemed to give comfort and aid to the enemy is going to be seen in a bad light over time. Anybody that's made money off of selling our sovereignty, that's going to be a bad thing. So what people need to do is put themselves in a place where they end up on the correct side of history with respect to the Constitution, especially the Constitution first, and even just history second. But after a war, if you've been found to be profiting over bloodshed of American sailors, even if it's just to sell weapons or, this is all going to be shook out in history. So, time's going to be a great judge of this sort of thing. Here's another bullet point. It looks like there's a movie out there called The Sound of Freedom, and it's breaking every Hollywood industry rule. That's doing very well at the box office, and so good on I guess it's Vin Caviezel stars in it, and another number of other people. I got to see the movie last week. I enjoyed it. It was along the lines of a movie called Man on Fire. It's kind of the same genre about kidnapping and trafficking. I recommend both, but I recommend them for adults. They're not for all audiences. Parents should be, if you're going to take your teens to that movie, you need to be ready for some pretty extreme topics. And if your child is innocent, don't rob them of their innocence by taking them to a movie like that. That just becomes part of the problem. So, great movie for adults, but just for, I guess you'd call us fully maturated individuals. All right. So the left right now in D.C. particularly are concerned that the Supreme Court now is partisan towards just conservatives. And I don't think that's true at all. I think what they're partisan towards is the Constitution. Now, if the Constitution is your problem, then yeah, they're partisan. But that's their job, is to interpret the Constitution. So if you don't like the Constitution, I can see where that was a problem. So, yeah, I think there's a bunch of people out there with dual identities or dual ideas that you can both tear down and be for the Constitution at the same time. It's really not the case. You're either for the rule of law, for the rights of the people, or you don't believe it, right? Now, here's my last item, Ellie. And I don't know, I'm not in as long as I probably should be. How long have I been on?
A little over an hour.
Jeez, what happened? So Jerome Corsi's out there saying that the Biden administration wants to, get this, block out the sun. Why would he want to block out, or why would the administration want to block out the sun? That's a pretty big statement. I guess Jerome will explain it here in the future, but yeah, he's made that assertion. So I thought that's
The failure of the EVs.
Pardon?
The failure of EVs.
Well, if you block out the sun, you're not going to have air movement.
That's right.
Because that's driven by convection, and you're not going to have solar uptake with photo cells, so there's no electrical there. So what are they talking about here? Are they talking about famine? And yeah, I mean, what is this all about? And we've also had some other people out there that are postulating that now that the World Health Organization, see if I can find the dip on that the World Health Organization wants to have some sort of a crisis that may give them the capacity to have, say, a world health emergency, like climate will devastate the food supply or something crazy like that, especially towards this 2024 race. Is the race a concern of the World Health Organization? It seems like they're trying to grab power. Maybe. What about this administration? Are they going to feel threatened by this new race? Gee, all those things kind of get together, couldn't they, Ellie?
Yep.
And if that happens, are they going to restrict travel? They're talking about taxes right now in New York. It costs you, $32 to go from the boroughs into Manhattan, or from Manhattan out into the boroughs. Isn't that like the starting of the 15-minute city thing? Gee, it looks like there's a bunch of mini totalitarians running around all over, trying to just kind of worm in and get their way. And this is all happening while our president is in the United Kingdom. administration's under considerable pressure here at home, and there he's in the United Kingdom. What does that tell us? It tells us when the Biden administration is under considerable pressure, the president has run to the United Kingdom. So that's what I got for you tonight, Ellie, and I hope that was a good news report. But as far as nuclear war, no. As far as more tactical interaction, yeah, that's really possible. And that's possible sooner than later, I would say, considering the situation that Ukraine finds itself in, and with the Russophobia that we have by a group of neocons that may or may not be warranted. It's something to concern yourself about if you have younger children, the age, war age, or kids in the military, or kids that are, because usually these things that get started where there's can be no clear winner usually take a long time and grind on for a long time. So, yep, here we are. I think this is as honest as we can be with the situations we find ourselves in, and I hope you enjoyed my little 2 cents on it and my opinion and what I've heard out there in the wild. So there we go, Ellie. I hope that everybody can subscribe and share with friends and family and, just people you meet, that we're having these discussions, particularly on Wednesday, but also my news report and Ellie's news reports get involved with what's going on generally around the world. So, okay, thanks for tuning in, and we're happy to see y'all. Thank you.